of the Orange River RPD. We concluded last time with public input, and so now we will close public input and we will reopen the hearing to the parties. This is the time that they have the opportunity to respond to any questions or issues that were raised during the public testimony portion of the hearing. I don't know how long this will take, but hopefully questions that were raised by the public can be addressed during their presentation. And then at the conclusion of that, if I don't have any questions, we'll move to closings and we'll conclude the hearing. I'm ready to begin.
Good morning, and for your record, my name is Russell Schrupp with the Henderson Franklin firm here in Fort Myers, representing the applicant 11400 Orange River LLC. Our presentation today, as you mentioned, will be to answer questions presented during the public testimony and to rebut certain testimony that was presented during the first day of hearing on November 16th. We have a rebuttal PowerPoint, and I've got 2 hard copies for you, if I could submit at this point.
Okay, this will be applicant's exhibit number 10. Rebuttal PowerPoint.
Thank you.
You have 11, I'm sorry, thank you. Applicant, exhibit number 11.
Okay, the brief outline for our rebuttal today in terms of presentation is on the slide in front of you.
My screen is not working, Maria.
Back there,
If I have a paper copy, I could just follow along on this. Oh, there it goes.
Okay, thank you. This is the order of presentation for our rebuttal testimony, and it will involve additional testimony from some of our consulting team that also presented on November 16th. Ted Treesh will lead off and will address questions and concerns raised about the traffic impacts of the project. These issues were primarily in the areas of how the TIS was prepared, the timing for the preparation of the TIS, and also on how the possible turn lanes into the project will be determined at the time of development order. So he will address those issues and questions raised. Carl Baracco will follow, and he'll address the engineering issues and questions raised by the public. These were primarily had to do with the pass-through drainage system and the improvements that are being proposed, and how this proposal meets with county design requirements and also with previous studies for drainage in the area. Mr. Baracco will also address questions regarding water consumption for irrigation purposes on the project, which was another question that was asked, I think, a couple of times. Jesse Sorrells will address the environmental questions. These questions primarily had to do with the protected species survey that was prepared as part of the application and to which he testified at the first day of the hearing. He will also address compliance with several environmental policies in the LEA plan that were raised by members of the public. And then Jennifer Sapin will address the LEA plan consistency issues raised by the public. There were a number of policies raised by members of the public that the project was asserted to be inconsistent with. Jennifer will review these policies and how the project demonstrates consistency with these policies. She will also address some of the design questions and issues that were raised on November 16th. At the end, I'll give a very brief summary of the project and our testimony. Just before I turn it over to Mr. Treesh, a couple of points that I would make. The public testimony on November 16th was it was extensive and wide-ranging. We did order and review a transcript of the public testimony so we could thoroughly identify the issues that were raised and attempt to address them here today. I have asked our consultants during the testimony today to focus on the issues and the questions that were presented during the public testimony and not simply repeat their presentation in the case in chief that we presented on November 16th. Undoubtedly, there's going to be some overlap and some refreshing going on from what we testified earlier, but we'll endeavor to keep that minimal and directly address the questions and issues that were raised.
I will not cut you off.
Thank you, appreciate it. And finally, I know, and I know you will anyway, but please feel free to ask questions as we move through this. If other questions arise or if you feel that we need to expound on our answers to some of the questions that were raised. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Treesh.
Okay, I'd like to swear in staff and applicant's team so that the testimony we accept is under oath. If you will be testifying or presenting evidence on behalf of county staff or the applicant, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony and evidence you enter into the record at this hearing will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ted Treesh with TR Transportation Consultants. There were some concerns raised during the public comment period regarding the technical aspects of the traffic impact statements and the turn lanes, the timing of the traffic study, et cetera, and the level of service analysis. And I just, for the benefit of the public, just like to go into a little more detailed explanation and just kind of reiterate some points that were made during my initial presentation. Again, the process that we followed is outlined in the Lee County Administrative Code. It's very detailed in the process. The numbers that we use are dictated by the county. We don't make up any of the numbers. All the numbers are provided either by the state in terms of traffic data that's collected by the state or the county. All that information is provided by those agencies. The only information that we look at and that we formulate is the distribution of the traffic and how that traffic from the development will impact the roadways and where it will travel once it leaves the site or how it enters the site. And you can see from the roadway network on the aerial, there's very limited roads in this area. It's either Orange River or Tice going to and from the west to get to the I-75 corridor or employment centers that are to and from the west, and only Orange River to get points to the east. So the distribution of traffic from this project is very limited on where the trips will be able to go. So the administrative code dictates what roads we have to analyze based on the size of the project and the number of trips that generates, that the project will generate. And based on the number of trips that this project will generate, the analysis dictated that we analyze the roadways that are identified here on this slide that I previously identified. That included Orange River from State Route 80 out to Buckingham, Staley from Tice to Orange River, Tice Street from Staley to Country Lakes, Buckingham, both north and south of Orange River, and then Palm Beach Boulevard, both east and west of Orange River. Then we evaluate the level of service on the roadway. Again, level of service, there was members of the public that had some questions about level service. Level service on the roadways is measured from level service A to level service F. Level service A, similar to your report card in school, level service A is good, level service F is bad. Level service A is more of a free flow condition. The level service is based on a number of different factors from the Highway Capacity Manual that's published by the Federal Highway Administration. There's a lot of technical aspects that go into that level service computation on a roadway, but it's really based on the density of traffic on the roadway, the travel speed, the number of lanes, the roadside obstacles, the number of driveways, the number of intersections per mile. There's a lot of information that goes into calculating the level service thresholds that the county utilizes, and it's based on a program that the Florida Department of Transportation produces. And the county updates their level service thresholds on a regular basis. And so Again, those numbers are provided to us by the county, and they maintain those service thresholds throughout the county and update them periodically. So it is something that's looked at by the county on a routine basis. Again, as I indicated in my original presentation, transportation concurrency is no longer a regulatory issue in the county. Concurrency is more of a informational purposes, so the level service is intended to inform the county DOT of what roadways are starting to look in terms of travel times and delays, and what roadways are that need to be looked at in terms of future improvements. And again, we talked about the policies of the Buckingham area in terms of what roads can and cannot be widened. But the analysis showed, and again, the original traffic study that was submitted as part of this project was done with an analysis year of 2025. Because of the time it took to get to this public hearing, I updated that to a 2027 build out. And again, all the roadways were shown to operate at a level service E or above with the project traffic added to all the roadways. Again, if you look at the Lee County Comprehensive Plan, yes.
I need to ask a question.
Yes.
This project was already approved for 160 some odd units.
Yes.
Is that approval factored into the background traffic, or when you do the traffic study for this project, you're looking at what you're already approved for plus the incremental increase?
I was going to talk about that in a second.
All right, well then I'll just wait.
Okay. So initially, we look at the background traffic plus our project. So the 160 trips, or the trips from the 160 units was not part of the background traffic. So this analysis looked at the background traffic increase to the year 2027 based on historical growth trends in the area. So we don't just look at today's traffic and add our trips to it. We look at today's traffic, increase it by a growth rate based on what's been happening in the past, because that's the only thing we have to go on is what's been the growth in the past, continue that growth rate to the year 2027. And again, this is all worked out in the methodologies with the county, and this is acceptable methodologies how we do traffic studies with the county and the state. Then we pick that year in 2027, and then we add our trips from this project on top of that future projected volume in 2027, and that's where we do our analysis. And again, that is peak season volumes. The traffic volumes that we start with in today's volumes that we get from the county are based on peak season conditions. So it's not, even though the traffic study may be dated December or August, that's just when the report was published. That doesn't mean that's when we collected data. We didn't collect any data for this analysis. The data that's in the traffic study is done based on peak season conditions. We did do traffic counts for this analysis, so we did collect that data, but the traffic counts, again, were then adjusted for peak season conditions based on factors provided by the state DOT, based on factors that they've collected, on data they've collected in the area, to adjust that data to peak season conditions. So every analysis we do, as required by the county, is based on peak season conditions, which is the peak season between January and March. So it's not the highest hour of that 3-month period, but it's, they call it the 100th highest hour in Lee County in the area, but it's, that's determined to be the peak season conditions.
So what you're telling me is a lot of this calculation relies on formulas that are based on constants that are set by the state and the county.
That's true.
And then you do an independent analysis of the project and the trips it will generate, and you basically superimpose it on the conditions that are forecasted based on this information from the state and the county.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Again, the study was conducted based on the requirements of the administrative codes, based on the peak season conditions. The level service is based on the highway capacity manual. I talked about the impact fees that would be collected The 1.4 million is just the road impact fees. That doesn't include fire, EMS, parks, the other impact fees that are collected. There were some questions about turn lanes. We don't look at turn lanes at time of zoning because zoning is more of what I call a 10,000-foot view of the project. It gives entitlements to the property. It doesn't give us the right to go out and move dirt today. In the county, there's another process called the development order before you're allowed to move dirt and actually start construction. And at the time of development order, there's another traffic study required. And that's the time we look at turn lanes, because at the time of development order, you know exactly what you're going to build. And again, Lee County has a policy, an administrative code, that looks at turn lanes and specifically the requirements of turn lanes based on the classification of the roadway and the number of turns that are projected at your intersection of your site access intersection. So if the turning movements that are projected at that site access drive meet the thresholds that are in the administrative code, then the developer will be required at their expense to put in left turn lanes or right turn lanes at their site access drive. So this project has a site access drive on Tice Street as well as one on Orange River Boulevard.
And you're saying this analysis comes into play at the development order stage?
That's correct.
Okay, and at that point, they could possibly build all the units that they're asking for today or something less. But whatever that calculation is based on the units they're actually seeking, that's what the turn lane analysis will be based on?
That's correct. The county will require, the project is being requested to be approved for, what's our unit? I should know this.
268, something like that?
What's our unit request?
258.
258.
258. So let's say they only come in for 100 units in the development order. Some projects come in, Lennar comes in for phases. I know a lot of their projects. Lee County will require us to do the turn lane analysis based on the full development at the initial development order.
Okay, so at the initial development order stage, you're going to review the entrances and exits to this project and determine whether turn lanes are necessary and how long these turn lanes are based on the entire 258, whether you build them or not.
Correct.
Okay.
And based on the calculations, based on the 258, there will be turn lanes warranted on Orange River based on the current turn lane policy that Lee County has adopted today.
And
So unless that policy changes between now and the time of the DO, which it could, the turn lane policy just changed in the fall of last year. But the current turn lane policy, as it's currently adopted, turn lanes are warranted on Orange River based on this development intensity. So the developer's aware of that. Whoever develops this property, there will be turn lanes warranted on the left and right turn lanes on Orange River Boulevard at the site entrance.
And what about Staley?
Staley, I don't believe so because it's a local road, so the turn lane requirements are a lot less in terms of the number of turns required. So I don't believe any turn lanes will be warranted on Staley.
All right, so it's premature at this stage to make a call on that?
Correct. And I did talk about turn lanes at Staley and Orange River, and that was just because I know a lot of the public talked about that intersection because that was part of the analysis that was in the traffic study, and there was no, and I know that intersection is a problematic intersection. The county is aware of that intersection as a problematic intersection because there are no turn lanes at that intersection today. Right now it's a two-way stop intersection. Staley stops at the intersection. It's a T intersection. Orange River is a free flow movement, so it's just with any T intersection on a busy two-lane road, you're going to sit there a while.
You're at the mercy of other drivers.
Right, you're at the mercy of the other drivers to let you out. And, but again, the 1.4 million in road impact fees is put into the coffers at Lee County, and they can use that money to help do road improvements in the area. And obviously, we have a vested interest in the area as well, and we'd like to see some improvements done in that area. So, but it's an off-site intersection. The county doesn't have any administrative code requirements that require the developer to do off-site road intersection improvements. We have to do site-specific road intersection.
Has there been discussions with the county regarding the possibility of pipelining the impact fee collected for roads, pipelining it to make that improvement?
We've tried those discussions on other projects, and they're really not conducive to that. They have many projects that need funding, and they can speak for themselves.
But there has not been discussions regarding that possibility?
No. This goes to your question. We did do the analysis regarding the 160, and the level service doesn't change. The level service analysis that I did with the 258 is the same as it is with the 160. So if we kept the 160 on the property, the level service analysis on the county road system and the state road network that you see on this slide, the level service results are the same between the 160 and the 258 based on the 2027 level service analysis. And again, the final slide was the additional trips going from the 160 to the 258, the additional trips leaving and coming in during the peak hours is about 1 trip per minute leaving and 1 trip in the afternoon coming home. So it's a very minuscule increase in trip generation in terms of the overall, what you're going to see in terms of actual on the roads.
Let me restate what I think I hear you saying, that there is only an incremental increase in the transportation impacts created by these additional 98 units
Correct.
when compared to the 160 that the project is already approved for.
That's correct.
So the roads do not fail based on the books at 160, and the roads do not fail based on the books at 258.
That's correct. And that's all I had based on the.
Okay, I may have more questions later, but I don't have questions now.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. For the record, my name is Carl Baracco. I'm going to review the pass-through conveyance on the site.
Okay,
And I'll
just a
start
second.
by,
Hang on, I want to write some notes based on what I just heard. Thank you, I'm ready.
thank you. I'm going to begin by recapping the existing conditions and the current approval. And first is the cross-section on the approved master concept plan doesn't fit within the 40-foot easement and also would limit the capacity and conveyance of the existing system and or the approved system. Again, as calculated, the ditch would actually require about 60 feet of width rather than the 40-foot easement, and that's because of the slopes required in the current approval and between the elevations of the existing ground and the bottom of the ditch. And then finally, there's not enough room to maintain the conveyance as it exists. Currently, it can be maintained by the side, from the sides, but after development, if it goes forward in the current plan, there would be lots and improvements on both sides, which would then leave only the ditch itself as a maintenance corridor.
Okay, so what you're saying is, in its existing configuration, the width of this drainage easement does not provide room for maintenance?
It doesn't provide for maintenance, and it doesn't provide for the actual required width of the conveyance in the current approval. So there would be, in the existing condition and with the current approval, there would be some problems with implementing that. Next, I'll go over the proposed conveyance. We're proposing one dual 60-inch culvert crossing at Staley Road. And I think it's important to note, and if you can look at the drawing to the right, the existing conditions are dual 54-inch pipes at the south and dual 54-inch pipes to the north. Both throttle the conveyance. The proposed plan is to provide dual 60 inches so that that conveyance can be increased in the future. The current plan also proposes significantly increased flow areas in the sections, and this is really illustrated again in that drawing to the right. You can see that the yellow corridor and bisecting the property is the existing condition, and is very narrow and very defined, and would even be further defined after implementing the current plan, because there would be lots and a berm, and would be limiting conveyance in that conveyance itself, whereas now in the current condition, it can overflow on both sides. So we've taken that into consideration with the proposed sections, and again, they're much wider and deeper to improve the flow areas.
And the current drainage ditch you explained last time is actually negatively because of the depth. Do I understand that right? Because I was reading the transcripts this week, so I could be up to date.
Exactly. One of the things that we knew we had to address is the wetland. The wetland is lost its hydrology because this existing conveyance is basically lowering the groundwater table, and that would be maintained that way with the current approval. And I'll get into this further, but we addressed that in our plan, and our plan allows the groundwater table to be reestablished, which will then rehydrate the wetland and allow that wetland to begin to flourish. And I think the environmental consultant can give you more information on that if you'd like. But in order to do that, we had to address the groundwater table because the existing ditch is lowering the groundwater table and draining the wetland.
So replacing the current conveyance with this more meandering path will hydrate the wetland
Exactly.
and filter the water,
Yes.
which neither is occurring right now under the current design plan.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So again, the proposed plan addresses the maintenance by adding a 10-foot corridor for maintenance along the current path, along the proposed path, so that that system could be maintained. And finally, the proposed system will increase the drainage capacity south to the Orange River. Now, that would require improvements to the south and the north to increase drainage. So let me explain that a little further, and I'll explain it in three segments. If you look at the south segment, and on the drawing where you have all those drainage conveyances meeting at the south line, that could be considered one part of the system. The middle part of the system would be the project, and that would be the second part. And then the third part would be from Orange River Boulevard to the Orange River. In order to increase the drainage to the south, all three of those segments need to be improved. We are simply just providing that middle segment so that if at any time the drainage is improved, it's there, it's not restricted. With the current plan, there would be no way to increase the conveyance. We're doing that right now in this proposed plan so that it's available to the county in the future to increase all of the conveyance to the Orange River.
But in the meantime, you're going to control off-site flows so that the property north of Orange River Boulevard is not flooded by virtue of this redesign.
Correct, and that's very important. We can't, what we're saying is we are maintaining the existing drainage. We can't bring any more water onto the north because it would be detrimental to the north.
No faster and no more.
Correct, the intent, and really the system is constrained and throttled by both the dual existing 54-inch pipes to the south and throttled by the existing 54-inch pipes to the north.
So they'll remain in place.
They will remain in place, and if anyone wants to increase the entire conveyance, those would have to be addressed. But in the meantime, we're proposing the dual 60 inches in the middle so that that would be in place already. And again, recapping what we just talked about on the next slide. The proposed system is designed at a minimum to maintain the current conveyance capacity. That's all we're doing right now. And it provides for potential additional conveyance upstream and downstream improvements by others.
Well, how does it provide for additional conveyance of downstream improvements?
It doesn't. I want to be really clear on that. We are not providing any improvements to the south or to the north. We're just providing the improvements on this site so that at any time in the future, the south and the north improvements could be undertaken to improve the drainage for the south. So that, for instance, if the county wants to implement the improvements that are in the Strayhorn report from the Southern Lee County Mitigation Plan, which the county produced, the middle segment, our segment, would be ready to accept those improvements. In the meantime, with this proposal, the conveyance would remain virtually as it is today.
Okay, so under the proposed site plan, surface water management system, this bypass system is designed to accommodate more water than currently comes today.
Yes.
Okay.
And Carl, just if I,
But there would be improvements necessary up or downstream for that to happen.
Both.
Right.
If you make the improvements to the south and you don't make the improvements to the north, you're going to negatively impact those people to the north.
Right, so if by virtue of this study, the county decides to move forward with these area-wide improvements, this piece of the puzzle would be in place.
Exactly. And to take it a step further, if the current plan is implemented, there would be very little way to improve that because you have this 40-foot or even 60-foot easement bisecting the project, but you would also have then improvements of lots and other improvements that would basically make any other improvements on the site.
Foreclose the opportunity to create an area-wide drainage improvement.
Exactly, at least going through the system. They could somehow go around the system, but that would be the only option.
Some bypass,
Yes. Off the
which would
site.
take land.
Yes.
Okay.
So that really covers the second bullet point about us providing the improved segment of the existing constrained system on the site. And again, that is consistent with the intent of the Strayhorn study, which is part of the Southern Lee County Mitigation Plan. Finally, there was a question about the weir that we're proposing. The weir is there to reestablish the groundwater, again, for the wetland.
And where is the weir located? Can you?
It is located in between the driveway from Staley Road and the crossing at Orange River Boulevard. And we have had discussions with Lee County. We don't have anything in writing. I believe there was agreement that Lee County would operate the weir. But I will tell you that the operation of the weir would be regulated by the South Florida Water Management District. Again, I'd like to do another recap, and that is when we first started this project, we did some concept planning, and we set off to address the conveyance, as we just discussed, to improve water quality, reestablish the groundwater and hydrate the wetland, as we discussed, and then buffer Orange River Boulevard and Staley Road. I'd like to give you a little bit more information on the improved water quality. And first I'll talk about the on-site system. That's a closed system. And with a closed system, we can estimate the nutrient removal. That's because, and there were some questions again about how do you do that. Years ago, Dr. Harvey Harper did a study at the University of Central Florida and gathered data from all over Florida to determine and come up with a methodology to estimate nutrient removal in closed systems. That methodology has been widely accepted, and it is accepted by the South Florida Water Management District. That nutrient loading analysis was done for this project, was reviewed by the South Florida Water Management District, And the conclusion is that with the proposed project, 80 kilograms per year of nitrogen would be removed from the discharge, and 30 kilograms per year of phosphorus would be removed. And we can quantify that for the on-site system because it's a closed system. Going to the pass-through system that we've been discussing, we can't quantify that because it's an open system, but we can take a qualitative approach and look at the system, which is what we did. And we know that because of the wider sections, the velocity of the drainage will be much lower. We know that there will be increased residence time. That's because of the open water that you can see on the drawing. And there will be significant littoral plantings on within the entire pass-through system. All of these three things will remove nutrients from the water from the time it enters the system to the time it leaves the system at Orange River Boulevard. So while I can't quantify the nutrient removal in this open system, I can say in my professional opinion, there's no doubt that the water quality leaving the pass-through system will be improved.
So these design features, lower velocity, increase residence time, which allows for more filtering of nutrients, and the littoral plantings enhance nutrient uptake.
Correct.
So the design is what creates this.
Correct. And then the plants basically intake those nutrients for their survival and their growth.
Right. And so whatever those nutrients are right now are directly outfalling to the Orange River
Yes.
because there is very little velocity constraints in that ditch, and there is not residence time comparable to what is proposed, and there's no plantings.
Exactly. And, this existing ditch was excavated years ago, if we look at aerial photographs, and back then the intent was simply to drain the land, and we've learned a lot since then. We said before, and I'd like to recap that again, there would now be a maintenance agreement in place. That would require the developer to provide $100,000 in a fund and then transfer that to the homeowners association.
Okay, so help me understand this. The developer is going to construct the improvement, and that's not part of this 100,000.
Correct.
After the improvement is constructed and operating, the proposal is to take 100,000 and put it in escrow or aside to be transferred to the HOA when they eventually take over the maintenance of this conveyance wetland area?
Close. The only difference is the county would like to do the maintenance, and they'll draw from that fund, and that fund would be replenished by the homeowners association. And that would be the third bullet. The county, at its request, would physically maintain, but the HOA would pay the county's cost.
So there's going to be an agreement that allows the county to enter, maintain, and be reimbursed for the cost of maintenance from
Yes.
this fund initially, but once the HOA is set up with dues and whatnot, that's going to be replenished each year.
As needed, yes, and I believe there's a draft of that agreement in place.
Madam Hearing Examiner, if I may, there's a slight nuance that I think we need to clarify, and Richard Aiken has been primarily involved in negotiating this with the county, and if he could clarify a couple of the points that were just made.
Okay, well, let's get through Carl,
that's
and then we can skip to Richard.
Thank you.
So now we'll move on to the coordination we've had with the county and with the Water Management District. Throughout the process, we've had numerous meetings with the county and the South Florida Water Management District. And one in particular was regarding maintenance of what we had in place in a previous plan as it was developed, about a 360-foot culvert bisecting the wetland because we didn't want to draw down the wetland. That's this, and the county had some concerns with maintenance of that. If you recall, at the last hearing, Mr. Murray made some comments through, he wasn't able to be here, but he made some comments through a representative, and one of his concerns was maintenance of a 360-foot culvert. That was the same concern the county had. In working with the county and with the Water Management District, we developed the current plan, which is an open ditch, swale, conveyance, but with a slurry wall on both sides so that the open conveyance would not drain the wetlands. So we were able to come up with a plan that everyone likes to reduce that culvert to a standard roadway crossing length. In addition, Lee County Department of Natural Resources and the South Florida Water Management District have reviewed conveyance calculations which we prepared, including a HEX model of the pass-through system. Again, that resulted in some changes to the conveyance, one I just mentioned, and it also resulted in the agreement regarding maintenance, which we previously reviewed.
So what is a slurry wall?
Essentially an impervious wall. It's a vertical wall so that it separates the wetland from the conveyance so that the water can't move horizontally from the wetland into the conveyance.
It's controlled by the weir at that point.
Yes.
So the slurry walls are on either side of this weir?
On either side of the open swale which bisects the wetland.
Okay.
And if you'd like, I think in our presentation in chief, there is a diagram where we can go back to if you'd like.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Help.
There was also a question about irrigation and utilities. The developer would be required to extend utilities, and again, that is consistent with the current plan. All the homes will be connected to central water and central sewer. But there was a question about irrigation, and I think it's important to note that the proposed plan would actually reduce the irrigated acreage by 10.5 acres. So the water needs would actually be reduced with the current plan as compared to the, would be reduced with the proposed plan as compared to the current plan. Further, all wells would have to be reviewed by the South Florida Water Management District and Lee County. And I think there was concern that problems that were encountered with veranda, with groundwater wells would appear here too. And I think that's really a poor comparison because the veranda, as well as projects like River Hall, have very high water use consumptions in the golf courses. So I don't think you can really compare the veranda or River Hall conditions with this project.
So what about the site design reduces the irrigation demand?
If you look at the area of the lots and the irrigated area in the current plan, it was approximately 10.5 acres greater than the irrigated area in the proposed plan.
Okay.
So basically, irrigated footprint is reduced by 10.5 acres.
Okay.
So in conclusion, I would say that our proposal would maintain and provide potential to increase conveyance capacity, as we've discussed. There is now a planned maintenance corridor and planned maintenance funding. The plant proposal rehydrates the wetland, increases buffers on the north boundary and the west boundary, improves water quality delivered to the Orange River, not only on-site, but in the pass-through proposal, and would decrease water consumption. That's all I have for you this morning. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
So the decrease in water use consumption is going to come from not having wells on the site to serve irrigation or single-family homes?
No, there would be wells on the site for irrigation, but the decrease it comes simply from the fact that there'll be less area to irrigate, 10.5 acres less to irrigate.
Right, and the service by public water is also reduces the possibility of wells, right? Or that was already a condition?
It was already a condition.
Yeah.
Both the current and the proposed plan would require central utilities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Before Carl steps down, do we want to go to that slurry wall
I got it.
graphic slide, and you can explain a little better?
This is Mr. Wasco's slide, but I'll attempt to go through it with you. So if you look on the right-hand side, you see the wetland preserve up high, and then to the left, you see the water surface elevation in the conveyance. And the water surface elevation in the conveyance is lower than the wetland. So without the slurry wall, water would move through the soil horizontally from the wetland preserve into the conveyance, which would drain the wetland. In order to prevent that, you'll see the slurry wall on both sides, and again, that's a vertical wall. The length of the conveyance, which is adjacent to the wetland preserve, which would prevent any horizontal movement of water from the wetland preserve into the conveyance. And the other thing you see there is an equalizer pipe so that the water in the wetland can equalize from one side to the other.
That will maintain the height of water in each half of the wetland there.
Yeah, in essence, it would allow the water surface in the wetland to be maintained at the natural higher elevation rather than being drained by the lower conveyance which bisects the wetland. And again, in the existing condition, without that, the wetland is being drained by the existing conveyance.
And this is only at the one connection point. Everywhere else, it's designed to hydrate the wetlands?
This would only occur where the conveyance bisects the wetland.
I see. Which is at the one location that you show in this sketch?
Yes, essentially it's immediately south of the driveway to Staley Road. And you can, where the section BB is there on the illustration.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could ask Richard Aiken to come up and kind of clarify some of the points regarding the maintenance agreement.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. For the record, Richard Aiken of Henderson, Franklin, Starnes, and Holt. I just wanted to clarify the maintenance agreement. The slide said that the maintenance account would be maintained by the HOA, and I just wanted to clarify what we mean by that. The actual funds will be held by the county and controlled by the county. The HOA will be required to re-up the funds every year. So if the amount is $100,000, which is what's provided for in the agreement, if hypothetically the county uses $10,000 in a year to perform the maintenance, that amount will have to be refreshed. That $10,000 would have to then be put back in to bring the account balance back up to $100,000. The actual maintenance will be done, the maintenance of the things like trimming of bushes, making sure that there are no obstacles in the conveyance ditch would be done by the county pursuant to the county's request and the discussions that we've had with the county. Any maintenance that would have to be done, or any, if there was like a structural failure of some kind, that would remain the obligation of the HOA at some later time if that were, something like that were to occur. So I just wanted to make that brief clarification. We have had a lot of discussions and gone back and forth with the county, Mr. Adams and I, on making this agreement final. I believe we're pretty close. At least we certainly know that these main points that I've discussed, I think, are pretty well set in stone at this point, I believe.
So at some level, the HOA is going to be maintaining plantings or whatever in this area, but the county is going to be maintaining the actual drainage conveyance?
Yes, and I believe specifically the county's concern was that as a result of their history and having seen how things have worked in other places in the county, at times some of these conveyances in other locations get clogged with debris. The trimmings don't get done enough to keep the conveyance free so that water can continue to flow, which causes upstream or downstream flooding in other locations. They want to make sure that doesn't happen here, so they want to have the ability and obligation to come and do that on this location, but they also don't want to have to pay for it, thus the maintenance funds.
Okay, thank you.
And just to reiterate, I think what we indicated at the first hearing, there is a condition in the zoning conditions, it's number 3, that requires the entry of this agreement prior to development order. So that's the safety, if you will, for getting this agreement in place.
Morning. For your record, my name is Jesse Sorrells. I work for Passerell and Associates. I'd like to present the following information in response to the environmental concerns brought forth by the public during the last public hearing. To start, during the public testimony, concerns were raised regarding the project's protected species survey. Just to reiterate the results, Passerell and Associates conducted the survey in June 2020. The specific date was June 24th, which is within Florida's rainy season, which spans from June 1st to October 31st. During the survey, the following protected species or their sign were identified. 1 gopher tortoise burrow, 1 scratch tree from a Florida black bear, and multiple air plant species, which are protected from a commercial exploitation standpoint. The public identified concerns regarding the methodology of the survey and questioned the accuracy of the results. To clarify, the survey was not a general wildlife survey, but rather a Lee County protected species survey, which is utilized to determine the habitat usage by federally listed, state listed, and/or Lee County protected species. There are no parameters set by Lee County regarding the time of year that the protected species survey must be completed. The methodology for the survey included meandering transects, pedestrian transects, so we walk through the woods. This is per the Wilson-Miller Incorporated methodology that has been approved by Lee County. The frequency of the transects performed was designed to meet or exceed the 80% minimum coverage requirement set forth by the Lee County LDC. And in addition to the protected species survey, specific species surveys will be conducted prior to the commencement of construction activities to determine if there is nesting or denning by protected species within the development footprint of the project. And that is at the direction of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
At the development order stage, when they do these more detailed studies of protected species, which species will they choose to study?
We have been advised to do the gopher tortoise survey, so we'll do a 100% gopher tortoise survey. We've already completed a red cockaded woodpecker survey and reached concurrence with the Fish and Wildlife that it's not going to affect the species. Additional pre-construction surveys will include the big cypress fox squirrel and the Florida bonded bat.
Okay, thank you.
The public identified a number of wildlife species of concern that have been observed within the Buckingham community. I'd like to go through and address them one by one. I've separated them into 2 categories. On the right, you have your wildlife species that are not afforded protection measures under the law, and under the left, you have the ones that are. First is the alligator snapping turtle, which is actually an FWC species of special concern. However, the alligator snapping turtle does not occur in Southwest Florida. The subspecies that we have here is the common snapping turtle. To move on, the bobcat, I'll go in order of the slides. The otter is not a protected species. Lynx doesn't occur in Southwest Florida. Swallowtail kite, coyote. For sandhill cranes, there's 2 subspecies that occur in this area. There's a migratory one that is not protected, and there's a non-migratory one, or the Florida sandhill crane, that is protected. I felt it was important to clarify that. Wild hogs are an invasive species and are actually considered a nuisance. And to follow, I'd like to cover the protected species mentioned during the public comment. To start, the Florida panther, the project site is not actually within the consultation area for the Florida panther. That consultation area is determined by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we're actually to the west of the boundary of the consultation area. Regardless of that, there is telemetry data within the greater Buckingham area. And due to that fact, we have included the Florida panther in our listed species management plan, as well as the human-wildlife coexistence plan. The next species, the crested caracara, is federally threatened. The protection measures for the crested caracara are centered around their nesting sites. No caracara nesting activity or behavior by caracara indicative of nesting was observed on the project site during the protected species survey or any other field work conducted on the site. The next species, the wood stork, is a federally threatened species. Protection measures, again, for the wood stork are centered around their nesting sites or their breeding colonies. No wood stork nesting activity or behavior indicative of nearby nesting activity was observed on the project site during the protected species survey or any other field work done on the site. Additionally, construction of the project's stormwater lakes and the flowway realignment will create additional foraging habitat for the wood stork. The next species, the big cypress fox squirrel, is a state-threatened species. No big cypress fox squirrels were identified during the protected species survey. However, the species is known to occur within the Buckingham area and will be included in the project's listed species management plan, as well as the project's human-wildlife coexistence plan. Additionally, pre-construction big cypress fox squirrel nest surveys will be conducted within the development footprint to determine nesting activity by the species. The pre-construction surveys will cover 100% of the development footprint, and if squirrel nests are identified, specifically big cypress fox squirrels, protection measures will be implemented for those nests. The next species, the gopher tortoise, is a state-threatened species. We did find evidence of gopher tortoise on the project site during the protected species survey. To address that, we are going to conduct a 100% gopher tortoise burrow survey within the development area. Any gopher tortoise burrow that is observed within the development area, a permit through FWC will be obtained for the excavation of those burrows, and any gopher tortoise residing within the development footprint will be relocated to a permitted recipient site, which is managed for the species. The next species, the Florida sandhill crane, again, the non-migratory sandhill crane subspecies is protected in Florida, but the protection measures pertain to their nesting sites. The Florida sandhill crane prefers large open marshes for nesting, and as such, the project does not contain suitable nesting habitat for the species. No sandhill crane nesting activity or behavior indicative of nearby nesting was observed on the project site during the protected species survey or any other field work conducted on the site. One member of the public brought up the bald eagle. The bald eagle is a water-dependent species, and therefore the project's proposed stormwater lakes will provide additional foraging habitat to the species. Protection measures for the bald eagle pertain to their nests, which are afforded a 660-foot buffer area from the nesting site. No bald eagle nesting activity or behavior indicative of nearby nesting was observed on the project site during the protected species survey or any other field work completed on the site. And the closest documented bald eagle nest per the FWC database is approximately 1.8 miles southwest of the project site. The Florida black bear is a Lee County protected species. It's not a state or threatened species, or state or federally listed species. Evidence of the black bear was observed within the project site within habitat that is proposed for preservation. And as such, the Florida black bear will be included in the listed species management plan and the human wildlife coexistence plan. And I will discuss project compatibility with the black bear a little bit further in my presentation. The last species, the eastern indigo snake, due to the presence of gopher tortoises on the site, eastern indigo snake will be included in the listed species management plan and human wildlife coexistence plan. And the project will implement the standard protection measures for the eastern indigo snake as set forth by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Additionally, worth noting on this subject, the applicant has already completed technical assistance with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife under Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act of 1973 and received concurrence that the project will not likely adversely affect any federally listed species. Okay, the following slides will address the specific Lee Plan policies mentioned by the public during the last hearing. The first one is Lee Plan Policy 123.2.6, which states avoid destruction of upland vegetation communities, including coastal and interior hammocks, through consideration of alternative site design layouts. The site plan for this project has been designed to concentrate development within disturbed land use types such as improved pasture and woodland pasture. And furthermore, the site plan meets the Lee County Indigenous Preserve requirements. The next policy, 123.2.13, promote optimal conditions rather than minimum conditions for the natural system as the basis for sound planning. The project site is not currently operating at optimal conditions due to disturbances from cattle grazing, exotic vegetation, and the straight cut ditch bisecting the property, which is affecting the hydrology. And the project has been designed to preserve 95% of the most ecologically sensitive habitat, which would be the wetland. And the only wetland impacts are due to the open conveyance flowway crossing and not due to residential construction. The next slide, or the next policy, 123.2.13. Oh wait, that was the one I just did. Okay, this is a continuation of it, sorry. Additionally, to promote optimal conditions, the proposed stormwater management system will restore the wet season water table, as Carl spoke about already. And as required by the policy, the design promotes optimal conditions rather than minimum by using this flowway and restoring the wetland and also concentrating the development within disturbed land use types. Ecological benefits from the straight cut ditch will include improved water quality, as Carl's already discussed. It will create increased foraging opportunity for wading birds and many other species, including the federally endangered snailkite and the federally threatened wood stork. And the planted littoral zones will increase flora diversity and also promote higher diversity at the benthic level, which is very important to wading birds. The next policy, Lee Plan Policy 123.3.1, encourage upland preservation in and around preserved wetlands to provide habitat diversity enhance edge effect, and promote wildlife conservation. If you look at the site plan on the right, the lighter green area is the project's wetland. That's for preservation. And the darker green are upland communities that are buffering the wetland that will also be preserved. Specifically, 6.35 acres of preserved uplands are proposed to surround the preserved wetland, providing a buffer from the development. Policy 123.3.3, protect wildlife from impacts of new non-agricultural development in non-urban areas through the creation and implementation of a human-wildlife coexistence plan for each new development requiring a development order. To clarify, this property is not in a non-urban land use classification, as it is not rural, outer islands, rural community preserve, open lands, in the DRGR. It's not conservation lands, wetlands, or coastal rural. Nonetheless, a human-wildlife coexistence plan will be provided to Lee County at the time of the development order application. Included in the human-wildlife coexistence plan, it'll cover all protected species identified within the project or any protected species that could inhabit the site based on scientific literature. The last policy I'll cover is Lee Plan Policy 123.12.1. Promote connectivity within and among Florida black bear subpopulations by maintaining, improving, or creating landscape connectivity as identified within the FWC Florida Black Bear Management Plan. Per the 2019 FWC Black Bear Management Plan, roads are impediments to connectivity for bears. The project site is bordered by two heavily trafficked roads, Staley Road and Orange River Boulevard, and therefore does not currently provide connectivity to habitats west or north of the project site. Furthermore, Homestead Lane and Luckett Road Extension are located south of the project and sever connectivity to the preserved 2020 lands located south of Luckett Road Extension.
Okay, so you're saying it's not connected at this time?
Per the FWC management plan, the roads are impediments to the
And it's
connection.
not any worse with the new plan?
Correct.
But if they wander in your direction, you're providing vegetative cover in this wetland that's restored?
Yeah, I'll cover that right now. Lands to the south and east of the project are within the Buckingham Rural Preserve and currently provide better habitat and connectivity for the black bear than the pasture land proposed for development. The lands to the east are separated from the project by the FPL transmission right-of-way, which inhibits the connectivity of the project to these eastern lands. Due to the nature of maintenance and construction rights within the FPL right-of-way, the right-of-way does not serve as a wildlife corridor in of itself. And lastly, the project's proposed flowway will provide a vegetative cover along the southern boundary of the project that could be traversed by the black bear and therefore maintain patch connectivity in accordance with the FWC Florida Black Bear Management Plan.
What does that mean, patch connectivity?
It's a term that was used in the management plan, and they're referring to, mosaics of habitat, and if there's vegetative covers that the bear can travel along, then it maintains patch connectivity. The proposed flowway with the buffer plantings of trees and shrubs would satisfy that vegetative cover.
Okay, thank you.
So in conclusion, the proposed project has been designed to meet or exceed the environmental regulations set forth by the FDEP, South Florida Water Management District, Lee County, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. If you have any further questions, I'll take them now.
Thank you. I do not have questions.
Thank you.
I'm ready for the next witness.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Sapin. I'm an AICP certified land planner with Baracco and Associates. I first want to start with a comparison of the two site plans. It was mentioned that this was something we wanted to look at to compare the two, what has changed and what remains the same. Starting with what remains the same, the access points are in the same location. You can see them here, both shown with arrows onto Staley and to Orange River Boulevard. The ditch has been realigned, but I wanted to point out the connection points where the ditch connects at Homestead and up at Orange River. You can see that those are in the same locations and are just rerouted throughout the project. The preserve is generally in the same area. Over time, the wetland has changed in shape, but it's generally in the same area as the approved plan. I did want to point out in Jesse's presentation, he said that we are meeting the indigenous requirements. Actually, there are no indigenous preserve requirements for this project because the lots are over 6,500 square foot. So any preserve is above and beyond what the county requires. One of the questions I heard a few times from the neighbors why the approved site plan shows lot lines and the proposed one does not. It's a pretty standard practice with master concept plans to not show lot lines and allow the property development regulations to control how the future development would be. This allows the developers a little more flexibility. With property development regulations, we create minimum lot sizes. In this case, we're proposing a minimum lot size of 50 feet. That would be needed to achieve the density of 258 acres. However, if a developer, when they're looking at their pro forma, if the market was seeking a larger lot, by keeping this vagueness of the bubble plan, this would allow the developer to build larger lots and not be restricted to only the minimum criteria. There were some questions about lighting. Single-family development does not require a lighting plan, but if one is proposed, then that needs to be shown at development order. Lighting is required by LDC to be dark skies, zero cutoff features. This means that there is no light above the fixture head, and there is zero light spillage coming from the property or preserve boundaries. So both projects would have the same requirement. But I do want to point out that the approved plan on the left, you can see the homes would be much closer to the perimeter. So while neither would have light spillage, you would be far more likely to see the lights within the homes of the approved project than the proposed project. Looking at Matt Simmons in the previous hearing brought up the marketability of the perimeter lots. So I wanted to point this out. On the approved plan, there are several lots that abut the perimeter, making those less desirable lots, especially those that the back of them are along the FPL power line easement. The proposed plan has been adjusted so that none of those rear views are directly on that power line easement, and none of the lots are directly on the perimeter of the project. I also wanted to point out the proposed plan allows for grading. The approved plan, you can see there's a hatch pattern for preserve that is right on the rear lot line and right on the right-of-way and right on the lake control elevation. This actually can't be built in this way, and there needs to be some room for grading. This would mean that the lakes in actuality would be smaller or the lots would be smaller. So several questions from the neighborhood was, well, why don't you just build the approved plan? We were okay with that. Well, there are several problems with the approved plan. As Carl outlined, the ditch as shown in the cross-section on the approved plan does not actually fit. It doesn't actually work. So when you couple the miscalculation of the ditch, in addition to not allowing any room for grading, you can see that the blue shown on the approved plan, which that's actually the easement, it's a little misleading, that's the easement area, not water area, that would take quite a bit more room than what is shown. And shown here, the rear lot line would be right on the water, which of course that's not possible. The approved plan has 8 acres less of lake. While we didn't do fill calculations on that, in my experience, looking at the plan, this is far lower than what would be required from a fill standpoint to excavate out of these lakes and to fill the lots. So the 8 acres in difference results in about 10,000 truckloads. So that is a cost savings and also an impact to the neighborhood of bringing in up to 10,000 truckloads of dirt. Whereas the proposed plan with these 8 acres of additional lake, we are expecting a fill balance on site. And as I mentioned, there are grading problems with the approved site plans of roads and lots and canals up against preserves. And as Matt Simmons mentioned, the inconsistent lot sizes is very difficult for developers to market and sell a variety of lot sizes in one project. Conversely, the proposed plan has expanded the ditch, as I mentioned, expecting a fill balance, and grading is allocated in spaces between the preserved natural ground, that is, and proposed ground. And it does allow for uniform lot sizes. Also looking at why not to build the approved plan, the proposed plan increases buffers and setbacks to a very large degree. You can see here in this table, looking at the setbacks on the approved plan, 45 feet along the roads, and then north against the existing single family. That is, the existing single family is in the northwest corner of the project, and the approved plan would only have a 30-foot setback there. So the homes would be 30 feet from those residences. The proposed plan increases that up to 150 feet, a minimum of 150 feet. Buffers have also been increased. You can see that the width and the acreage has increased greatly from 3.7 acres to 20.7 acres. There were some questions on what the buffer on Orange River Boulevard would look like. It is a 30-foot landscape buffer on the exterior of the 20-foot lake maintenance easement. The 20-foot lake maintenance easement would not have any plantings in it, but this does allow room for those trees to really grow to their fullest potential and expand out towards the lake. 10 trees per 100 linear feet, which is pretty dense for a Lee County buffering standpoint, planted at 16 feet at height, and double staggered hedge planted at 48 feet and maintained at 60 inches. I also wanted to point out, I did speak in error at the last hearing. The required buffer, I mentioned that a type B or a 15-foot buffer would be required. I was thinking of multifamily. Single family to the right-of-way requires no buffer at all. But this 30-foot landscape buffer was approved on the previous zoning. Another reason why not to build the approved plan, we've talked about the Buckingham future land use, the goals and policies of the Buckingham. But when you look at other areas of the comprehensive plan, looking here at the surface water management goals, policies, and objectives, and not looking at the internal water management system, but the pass-through conveyance system. The proposed plan really goes a long way in meeting a lot of these goals to protect and improve the quality of receiving waters, and we've heard that, whereas the pass-through ditch just sends it right through. Ours will slow that down and help to clean the water. We incorporate surface water management flowways and associated habitats, as Jesse mentioned, that this will provide habitat for some of the wading birds. We're incorporating natural systems by creating marshes, vegetated grassed swales with Florida landscaping and meandering flowways. Goals 61 and policy 61, and several of them in the surface water management policies, and innovative and sound methods for surface water management. We think that this is a very innovative way to help regionally the surface water and creating strategies that relies on natural features and mimicking the functions of natural systems. As Carl mentioned, the realignment will reduce flow velocity, allow for percolation, and trap and remove suspended solids and pollutants. In general, there were several comments about the Buckingham community plan outlined here in Goal 20. This was a slide I had, but just to outline again, The intent is to manage the future growth in the area. One of the ways we manage future growth is by following the LEED plan. In this case, our future land use category, allowing 2 units per acre. It's to also seeks to preserve the existing rural character. We are doing that by increasing setbacks and increasing vegetation around the perimeter. It also seeks to protect environmental resources. We are doing that by preserving the wetland, and we'll be able to rehydrate that wetland and bring it back to a better state than it is today. Policy 20.1.5 was mentioned. This applies to the rural community preserve future land use. Most of our development, the 129.1 acres, all of our residential development it does not contain that future land use. It is noted in the staff report, there's a small triangle, 0.5 acres, up near the entrance by that existing single family to the north. Within that 0.5 acres, that triangle that is rural community preserve future land use, there's no residential development. It is only buffering the flowway and a little portion of a lake. So the policy does not actually apply to the residential development because we do not have that future land use category. However, seeking to align with those goals, we have created large setbacks. This policy requires a minimum of 100 feet. We're proposing 150, sometimes 170 feet. There is a small area near the FPL substation where a 50-foot setback is proposed. We are meeting this goal by clustering and using only 35% of the site for developments of roads or lots, and it is zoned RPD. Policy 20.1.6 refers to transitions. Some comments from the public, I believe, was an understanding that the transition should occur within the project. And what this policy actually relates to is the community plan area. So the goal is to create transitions in the community plan area. In this case, that's the Buckingham Community Plan. The Buckingham Community Plan shown in this slide in the dashed white and black line type. So we are creating that transition by being a half a mile away from the edge and only separated from that higher intensity 6 units per acre urban community by a use that is now prohibited by the Buckingham Planning Community. So we are not an enclave of a more intense use with rural surrounding. On the edge, the transition is a use that is not appropriate for the planning community, and we create that transition that this policy seeks to imply. Lastly, policy 20.2.3 was mentioned, and Ted has gone over this, but I did want to point out that the goal of improving the overall functionality of roads within Buckingham, this policy is really directed more towards Lee County. And the $1.4 million in road impact fees, the county would be able to implement this policy if they so chose, and with improvements in the Buckingham community. However, as Ted mentioned, the project will analyze turn lanes and other improvements at time of DO. And I also, there were some questions about public notice. I do have the public notice, but I believe it was part of the staff report, but I can give that to you if you would like. It's photos of the signs and the affidavit.
Okay.
And there was also a comment on the Lee County availability. That is included in the staff report as attachment M, which states that capacity is not an issue.
And you're talking about school capacity?
School capacity, yes, that's correct.
Before Jennifer concludes, could I ask one other question for her to address? There was some I appeared to be some confusion during the public testimony about an equestrian path that was being provided. Can you explain a little bit better and clarify that?
The equestrian path, it's a carryover from the approved zoning. It was only along the southern boundary along Homestead Lane. The 30-foot landscape buffer along Homestead Lane, there would be an allowance within that buffer for a 10-foot pedestrian path, or sorry, equestrian path. This is nothing new. It was just continuing what was approved from the previous zoning. And that is all I have, unless you have any questions for me.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Just a brief summary and conclusion to our presentation. As I noted in the introduction I did back on November 16th, this property is primarily located in the not located in the Buckingham Rural Community Preserve, but it's located primarily in the sub-outlying suburban classification. Under the LEAP plan, it simply is not expected to be developed like properties in the Rural Community Preserve. As Jennifer noted earlier, a couple minutes ago, there is one small area, about a half an acre, that is located in the Rural Community Preserve, but there's no density on it and no buildings within 100 feet as required by the policy. There was clearly sentiment from members of the public that spoke on November 16th to treat this project as if it was entirely within the Rural Community Preserve, but clearly the LEAP plan does not provide for this or allow for this. And in fact, the LEAP plan directs through its policies, particularly policy 20.1.5 and 20.1.6, how this property is to be developed. We followed these policies, as Jennifer has testified to, and the testimony from the expert professional planning staff for the county, as well as our project's expert planner, is that the project is consistent with these policies and with the remainder of the LEAP plan. The project brings with it significant improvements over and above what the currently approved RPD provides, including the improvements to the drainage conveyance that others have addressed at length today, that will result in additional capacity, greater access for maintenance, and an HOA-funded maintenance account, so there is no burden to the public for maintenance of this facility. The changes to the conveyance and the increased buffers ensure compatibility and appropriate transitions to a much greater degree than the existing zoning plan. As Mr. Treesh noted, the traffic analysis was done based on accepted principles and methodology, and the LOS was acceptable for each affected roadway as established by the county. The analysis reflects no change in the level of service, and we're not going to tell you that the project will not have additional traffic impacts. It does, and those will be addressed at the time of development order with turn lanes as needed, and certainly with the payment of road impact fees as the project develops. It is worth noting again that there are existing limitations on roadway improvements in the LEAP plan for Buckingham that actually predate this project, this rezoning. Those are limitations that actually prohibit four-laning of most major roadways. While the traffic analysis did not show a need for four-laning of any of these roadways, the limitation on four-laning is a choice that was made by the community in adoption of the community plan, and the county incorporated it into the community plan, but I don't think it can form the basis for a burden that would limit development of the parcel that would otherwise be achievable. And finally, again, this project is consistent with Lee County Comprehensive Plan and the Land Development Code, asking only for a single deviation that as part of the excavation adjacent to the FP&L easement, I believe, and will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare. With that, we'd respectfully close and request a recommendation of approval with the conditions as set forth in the staff report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Staff, do you have additional?
No, ma'am. We are just here to answer any question you may have.
Well, I don't have any questions. I feel as though the record is complete. I have the information I need, testimony and evidence from experts and from members of the public. I will review all this against my obligation to do so under the backdrop of the LEAD Plan and Land Development Code, and I will prepare a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. It may take several weeks for that to be ready, but once it is ready, everyone here who filled out a public participation form will receive notice of that subsequent hearing in addition to a copy of my recommendation, and you can make arrangements to attend that hearing if you wish to be heard by the elected officials. I can't think of anything else that I need. The record is not left open. I have all the documents, so I will conclude the hearing at this time and thank everyone for coming.
Thank you.